Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I'm doing another tag. This is the Badass Poetry 101 tag. It was started by Stripcover Lit, and it's about 2 years old. I'll leave the link to the original tag video that those fellas did down below. I saw this on Rashmika Likes Books channel. She just recently did the tag, and I thought, man, that's a really fun tag, and I don't talk about poetry all that often, and I'm not sure I read poetry all that often, but I definitely thought it sounded like fun to go back and think about the poems that answer these questions. I also just today saw this tag done by Francis Burton over at his channel, and I had fun listening to his answer. So I guess this is kind of me jumping in on a revival of an old tag, but it really seemed like fun. So the original idea that the Stripcover Lit guys had was that they would put these questions and relate them to action hero actors or movie stars who are famous as action heroes. So all their questions are associated with specific famous action heroes. So the first question is Sylvester Stallone, a self-made original who has been doing it for decades. And the question was, what's the first poem you remember? Well, the first poem I remember as a poem, probably not surprising if you watch my channel, is in Fellowship of the Rings, and I'm pretty sure it's a poem familiar to lots of people. But this is probably the first poem that I thought of or remembered as a poem. And it's the poem essentially which describes Strider or Aragorn from the from the books. So here's the poem. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadow shall spring, renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. So I was a big Lord of the Rings fan, which I think I've said about 100 times on my channel. I read those books over and over again, and that's probably the first poem that I liked that I thought of as a poem, because I thought it was great that Tolkien could write prose and poems like that, and I just really like the idea behind the poem, that there's hidden value in lots of things, and that a lot of things that appear not to be worth very much can be actually quite valuable. So that was my answer to the question in the tag, a self-made, what was the first poem you remember? So the second question is associated with actor Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's easy to be captivated by the heroic stature combined with a boyish charm. And the question was, what was your first favorite poem? So my first really favorite poem, a poem that I read more as an adult or a college student, is a poem by Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas is one of my favorite poets. Tragic life cut short by severe alcoholism and drinking. By the way, just as a public service announcement, I saw that Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading had made a statement about drinking and alcohol. Let me just make a statement here real quickly. No matter how much you drink, it won't make you a writer. I know that lots of writers drink, but their drinking is not what made them a writer, and in many cases it's what prevented them from being more prolific writers and having longer careers. Anyway, Dylan Thomas wrote a lot of poems that I like a lot, but my favorite is called "And Death Shall Have No Dominion." I'm just going to read you the first kind of stanza. And death shall have no dominion. And death shall have no dominion. Dead men naked they shall be one, with the man in the wind and the west moon. When their bones are picked clean and the clean bones gone, they shall have stars at elbow and foot. Though they go mad, they shall be sane. Though they sink through the sea, they shall rise again. Though lovers be lost, love shall not, and death shall have no dominion. I don't know exactly what about that poem really spoke to me when I wrote it the first time, but I just like the cadence of it. I like the fact that the title of the poem is repeated at the beginning and the end of each stanza. I like the line, "They shall have stars at elbow and foot." I like that line. There's lots of stuff in that poem and in Dylan Thomas's poems in general that I really like. And at the risk of kind of making Dylan Thomas into a dude bro lit poet, there's a certain kind of muscularness to his poetry that I like. His poems almost always feel as though he's really caught up in an emotional moment, whether it's anger or rage or grief or love. They're really just raw to me, fairly muscular poems. That's not to say that they're not polished, because I think they are, and I think he was just a remarkable poet. So that was my answer to question number 2. What was your first favorite poem? So question number 3 is associated with action star Bruce Lee, and it says, the standard. Hard to argue with this level of excellence. What is the greatest poem you've ever read? So the greatest poem I've ever read is Sonnet number 29 by William Shakespeare. It's the one that begins with the line, when in disgrace. If you haven't read Sonnet 29, I really think you should. I've seen it discussed several times here recently, and actually been in discussions with people about that sonnet. So Sonnet 29 by William Shakespeare is the greatest poem I've ever read. I liked it so much I had it read at my wedding, and I realized that there are all kinds of interpretations of the poem which may not make it sound necessarily like it's appropriate to be read at a wedding, but for me it really was, and it spoke to my feelings about my wife and how she made me feel, regardless of how bad things were. So question 3, what's the greatest poem you've ever read? And to me, that's Sonnet 29 by William Shakespeare. Okay, so question number 4 in the Poetry 101 tag was, Jack is associated with the action star Jackie Chan. It says, Jackie Chan, starring in approximately 4 movies a year, is impossible to avoid the Chan Man. What poet have you read the most from? And I think the answer to that question, and I'm not really sure, but I think the answer to that question is Seamus Heaney. I've read most of this, if not all of this collection. I don't think I've quite finished all the poems I've written. So I've read most of this collection by Seamus Heaney, and so I think this is the poet I've read the most. This collection of poetry contains what has to be at least 50 poems, and I think I've read most of them. Okay, so if at this point in the video it looks like that I got interrupted really quickly and that now I'm filming in a different lighting conditions, well, you're right. Kind of busted here. I filmed the answer to the questions out of order, and I was just finishing my answer to question number 4 about what poet have you read the most. I was discussing this book of poetry, this poetry collection by Seamus Heaney, when my battery ran out, and that was the last segment I was filming. So I came back to film this segment to tell you what happened and my battery ran out. But I do believe Seamus Heaney is the poet I've read the most, because I've read most of that collection of his poetry. Question number 5 is associated with action star Terry Crews. An underutilized potential superstar. Who is the poet you'd like to read more? Well, the poet I'd like to read more is Scottish poet Robert Burns. Robbie Burns has written some of my some poems that I really like a lot. My Heart is in the Highlands is one of my favorite Robert Burns poems, but my absolute favorite is just basically called Scots Who Have, or Scots Waha, if you wanted to read it in as close to a Scottish accent as I could do. So I'm just going to read the first 2 stanzas of that because I like the poem a lot, and my family's last name is in the poem. My family name is a fairly famous name in Scottish history, and so I like to think of myself as a Scot, and so I'd like to read more of Robert Burns' poetry. So here we go. Scots Waha. Scots Waha with Wallace bled. Scots one Roos has afton led. Welcome to your gory bed, or to victory. Now's the day and now's the hour. See the front, O battle lower. See approach proud Edward's power. Chains and slavery. I just love that, the martial nature of that poem, and the kind of Scottish nationalism of that poem. But Robert Burns is definitely the poet that I would like to read more of. So that's my answer to question number 5. What poet you'd like to read more? Question number 6 is related to action star and Oscar winner Charlize Theron. And the question, it says, Charlize Theron, a woman whose presence and authority goes unquestioned out of sheer bad-assedness. And so the question is, who's one female poet you feel deserves more attention? Well, If I'm thinking of a badass female poet, I'm thinking of Nikki Giovanni. If you haven't heard of Nikki Giovanni, she is an African American poet who was a leading figure in the black arts movement and kind of a poet of the Black Power movement. And she was really active in the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s. And the word for her poetry, I think, is fierce. That's how I would describe her. And so as soon as I saw, a badass female poet, I thought, Nikki Giovanni is the most badass female poet I can think of off the top of my head. So I was just going to read you a little bit of one of her poems. I might read the whole thing. So here we go. This poem is called Ego Tripping. I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine perfect light. I am bad. I sat on the throne drinking nectar with Allah. I got hot and sent an ice age to Europe to cool my thirst. My oldest daughter is Nefertiti. The tears from my birth pains created the Nile. I am a beautiful woman. I gazed on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert with a packet of goat's meat and a change of clothes. I crossed it in 2 hours. I am a gazelle, so swift you can't catch me. For my birthday present, when he was 3, I gave my son Hannibal an elephant. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My strength flows ever on. My son Noah built new ark, and I stood proudly at the helm as we sailed on a soft summer day. I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Men intone my loving name, all praises, I am the one who would save. I sow diamonds in my backyard, my bowels deliver uranium. The fillings from my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thinned and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal. I cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird in the sky. I just love that poem so much. I love Nikki Giovanni. She is so fierce, and so to me, she is the most badass female poet possible. Question 7 is associated with an action star I've never heard of. I'm not a big action movie person. His name is Donnie Yen, and it says a supernova in a foreign action scene whose ageless poetry are you familiar with only through translation? So my answer to that question would be Rainer Maria Rilke. I first heard a Rilke poem in a movie. I think it was called Awakenings with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro. And I think this was the poem. And I really like this book of poetry, which is selected poetry of Rilke. So here we go. This one's called The Panther. And it's in the Jardin des Plantes in Paris. His vision from the constantly passing bars has grown so weary that it cannot hold anything else. It seems to him there are 1,000 bars, and behind the bars no world. As he paces in cramped circles over and over, the movement of his powerful soft strides is like a ritual dance around a center in which a mighty will stands paralyzed. Only at times the curtain of the pupils lifts quietly. An image enters in, rushes down through the tense, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. I like that image of the panther, of the idea of a spirit caged, fighting against that kind of confinement, presented as a powerful animal that is in that poem. So I really love that poem as well. So the answer to question 7, of poetry you're only familiar with through translation, is Rilke, who is translated from German into English. That's my answer to question 7. And question 8 references action star Christian Bale, and it just says he's Batman. What's the best poetry collection you've ever made it all the way through? Well, the best poetry collection I've ever made it all the way through is this copy of collected poems of Dylan Thomas. As I said earlier, when I read part of In Death Shall Have No Dominion, Dylan Thomas is probably my favorite poet, and I've read all the way through that collection. Okay, so if you're watching earlier in the video, right after question number 4, I admitted that I'd been filming the the answers to the questions out of order, and then my battery ran out, and that's why everything, the lighting looked different at that point in the video. Well, the lighting looks different here too. This is me filming the conclusion to the video. So I just wanted to tell you that I put links for Rashmika Likes Books, her channel, and this video where she does this tag down below, and I've also done that for Francis Burton's channel. The links for those are down below, as well as the link for the original tag from Strip Cover Lit. So let me know what you think about my poetry choices and my interesting adventure in filming this video in the comment section, and thank you for watching.